All right, listeners, I think you know that we are part of the Radiotopia network, which is basically a network built on the idea that you should support the most creative, independent audio makers around. No one, and I mean no one, embodies the Radiotopia ethos more than Benjamin Walker and his show Theory of Everything. Benjamin, who I've known for a long time, has been making beautiful, personal, sprawling audio documentaries for decades that help us understand the very strange world we live in. And now he has a new series called Not All Propaganda is Art. The new series goes back to the 1950s, when Western security agencies like the CIA paid artists, writers, and intellectuals to fight the cultural Cold War.
The CIA funds were free. I mean, no one was told what to say.
Gloria Steinem, activist who sees the CIA as a sort of enlightened pal or rich uncle, there is another viewpoint.
Look, if you're listening to this show, I know you like secret histories. I know you like a mix of culture and politics and shadowy figures. So what are you waiting for? Not All Propaganda is Art from Benjamin Walker. You can find it now wherever you listen or at theoryofeverythingpodcast.com. This episode is brought to you by Progressive. Progressive helps you compare direct auto rates from a variety of companies so you can find a great one, even if it's not with them. Quote today at Progressive.com to find a rate that works with your budget. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avergan. This day, March 6th, 1948, a New York City patrolman in plain clothes enters a cigar store on 106th Street in East Harlem, drops a penny into a machine called the Marvel Pop-Up, and then turns around and places the cigar store's owner into handcuffs and arrests him for, quote, unlawful possession of a gambling machine. This was part of a citywide crackdown on one of the greatest scourges in New York City of the 1930s and 40s. Pinball. You knew where this was going, folks. That's right. New York City under Mayor La Guardia was not going to put up with the degenerative influence of pinball machines corrupting young and old alike across the 5 boroughs. Listeners, seriously, just go Google this right now and look at photos. There are photos of police officers taking bats and crowbars to pinball machines and doing like bona fide perp walks of cigar store owners, in front of paparazzi in cuffs. It is quite a moment and actually a sort of decades-long campaign, which we will get into. And, you can call it a moral panic or a nanny state gone amok, but it also gets at some really interesting questions about gambling and social norms and post-prohibition, post-depression, post-World War New York. So let's get into it. Here to discuss, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Columbia and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
And our special guest for this episode, the legend Harry Siegel, senior editor at the Daily Beast, longtime columnist for the New York Daily News, co-host of the FAQ NYC podcast, and in general, I would say one of the great chroniclers of New York mayoral chicanery, past and present. So the perfect fit for this. Harry, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, Harry, you want to start there with actually maybe La Guardia? What is La Guardia's New York? I mean, we've all been to the airport and we sort of have a sense of him as like a sort of defining, but does this story let us understand a little bit about Mayor Fiorello La Guardia?
So, Mayor La Guardia is the little flower. He's this colorful character. Some of this gets compressed with the passage of time, but he has this real puritanical streak. And so he's going after pinball. And by the way, this is before, not your bust, which is just after, but the pinball ban and his war on pinball precedes the development of flippers. So at this point, you're just putting the ball down, shooting it up, and seeing where it lands, in effect. And there are all these places, think of like Chuck E. Cheese or Atlantic City and wait here for redemption signs, where you're shooting this ball up, it's going down, and then you're winning some sort of ticket or token you can redeem for stuff. And this is, in fact, a form of gambling. New York State's Constitution, you might not know this because we have casinos here and whatnot, but it actually bans gambling. So he starts this war on these. The guy who runs licensing for him, who once tried to ban a Ringling Brothers circus, Paul Moss, the licensing commissioner. He's going after everything. They're going after burlesque. the Minsky brothers, who basically invent burlesque. They make it to Broadway, and then he uses every, fire hazard thing and everything else he can to shut them down, and eventually bans the term burlesque and the term Minsky because it's a synonym for burlesque, in effect.
Wow.
So
His
he's
name
going
was banned.
hard at all this stuff. And he's going really hard at pinball. He thinks this is the mob. With burlesque, it's the end of incorporated filth. Right. With pinball, it's this vicious form of amusement. And this is big business, by the way. So the Daily Eagle in 1935 says $20 million is getting spent. This is just in Brooklyn. Across nearly 17,000 machines. That's $500 million in today's money.
Wow.
And so they start taking these machines, the illegal gambling ones, and dumping them in the water. Then you get up to Pearl Harbor. World War II is here. You can't make any more pinball machines because we need all that stuff for the war efforts. And not La Guardia, but this magistrate doing his business decides that all of them, and this really relates to today, are games of chance, not games of skill. And that was the argument then. It continues to be the argument about many things now, including sports gambling, lots of other stuff, and says no more pinball of any sort at all. Now, instead of dumping them into the river, a bunch of them get given up to the war effort, but a bunch of others, this is incredible. So La Guardia takes the legs, and he has them made into billy clubs and gives them to the police, 2,000 of them. So they can with the pinball legs. And there we are.
That's outstanding.
Talk about fun police. I mean, goodness.
And he says the pinball operators are a real larceny machine, slimy crews of tin horns, well-dressed, and living in luxury from this penny thievery. And last thing here is, before we get to the full ban, the people claiming this is a game of skill keep trying to show this to the licensing people, to the city council, and no, I have some control over this, which is only marginally true at this point. It's pinball evolves from bagatelle. These are really gambling games. However, after Flippers, this becomes much less true and relates to how pinball finally gets restored here just about when I was born. So a lot of good things happened in New York in the 70s.
And we'll circle back to that because I think that is probably one of the biggest sort of lingering questions that we're still grappling with today is skill versus chance and so forth. But, Kellie and Niki help us paint the sort of historical context here of yes, it's it seems to be that La Guardia is going after everything fun, but there's also just this larger, as we were saying, sort of crackdown on sin, crackdown on sort of moral degeneration. I mean, what's that milieu like?
So vice policing in the United States, I mean, it goes way back. Certainly the Puritans did it. They were banning Christmas. And in the late 19th century in particular, you have all of these new laws being passed that are about banning things that look like vice. And it could be things like prostitution, but it could also be things like alcohol. And often I think we tell the story of the culmination of this being prohibition. The United States bans liquor, and then when the Depression hits, Roosevelt's like, okay, we're done with that. We all need a drink. And it felt like that might be the end of vice policing. But as we see here, not only do you continue to have bans on, things like pinball games, but you do have pretty strict regulations about what can be shown on television and what can be shown in movies. So it is a society that has some pretty strict regulations around what kind of fun you're allowed to have.
Oh, yeah. Because everything is considered a slippery slope. So that if children are playing pinball machines, then it's just, it's just another day before they're dealing drugs. The
shooting up heroin at the end of the week.
Or jazz. Listening to jazz.
Yes, and kids are cutting school to play pinball, and they're giving all their allowance to the pinball machine. And, something that seems pretty harmless is also something that gets interpreted as, no, this can become a vice. Because, I think of it in the same way that we thought of video games, right? You get this big dopamine push when you score on a video game, or when you get to the next level. And then the next thing you know, it's, you go from Call of Duty to a real life shooter. It's a sort of windy line to these, really bad outcomes.
What's always so tricky about this on both sides is first, that when you outlaw these things, you then justify that outlawing. Because you say, look, the mob controls the pinball. And, in fact, it did. Of course, we saw this with the with the gay bars in New York in the 70s, famously. So you push things underground, you allow for that to happen, and then you say this is why we need to keep enforcing these laws and to doubling down on them. At the same time, as we just saw with the Sandy Hook settlement, right? Lots of people play Call of Duty. You can have like a moral panic like you got with the comic book codes when the industry self-regulated itself. And that whole can of worms. But at the same time, you absolutely do have that one person who's locked into this really bad and destructive thing, and this is giving them tools for it. And similarly with gambling, most people just go and have a good time, maybe lose a little money. My grandparents did, get a hotel room, and this all works out for them. And then you see people who are just addicted. And I know this from pinball, not slot machines, because I actually love playing pinball, and I can lock in. I basically skip my undergrad years to play Medieval Madness largely.
Oh, there you go.
But, there are people who simply can't unplug from these behaviors. Yeah. And the question is, if that means you need to ban them for everyone. And, I don't know the answers for that. I'm glad the historians here have given this serious thought, but those are difficult.
Yeah.
But isn't there an irony here, too, which is that you ban the pinball machines, then you use the scrap metal, and you make bullets, and you make bombs, like over 2,000 aerial bombs. Like, it doesn't, these pinball machines, they could have been a slide. You know what I mean? They could have been a playground equipment or, some sort of other recreational thing. And yet instead they're being used in acts of war.
Yeah. And La Guardia, I think this is a little also just opportunistic, but he wraps the anti-pinball effort into a lot of jingoistic pro-war efforts, and he says, quote, "It's infinitely preferable that the metal in these evil contraptions be manufactured into arms and bullets that can destroy our foreign enemies." So, Harry, does that tell us a little about La Guardia, or is that just any politician would take advantage of a big war effort to sort of fight whatever fight they were going to fight anyway?
I think it's really the second one, and you feel some of that in like the history of New York mayors smashing stuff on cameras, right? And there is La Guardia with the sledgehammer, famously, that image going at the pinball machines. Bill de Blasio was there. He didn't ride it himself, as a whole bunch of dirt bikes got ran over a couple of years ago, scourge of the Bronx and Upper Manhattan. Eric Adams, who hasn't had a chance to do that yet as mayor, but, as borough president, famously, he's like, here's the rat trap, here's the dead rats, here's what's up. Right. So this is a sort of symbolism that I think it's a tool that's available to all mayors in all circumstances, and a way to demonstrate your values and that sort of crusade. So La Guardia here, as in many other things, I think was a pioneer, and sort of set the template others have followed.
So performative, though. So performative. Because you got to get the optics ready with that sledgehammer. You know what I mean?
And I suppose...
got to get all the cameras ready.
Right. And Harry, as you will learn, and listeners to the show know, Niki and I turn everything into a media story. But, this is also a time in the 30s and 40s where now there is this sort of tabloid press, and like a photo op has, a real impact. There's in the 40s, there's probably 7 daily newspapers in New York or something, Harry. And so it's like there are a lot of people who will see this image, and being performative becomes part of the job.
Well, counterpoint, I was on newspapers.com just reading up on the contemporaneous coverage. And I was surprised what a small story this was. And I think part of that is because La Guardia had a decade-long crusade against pinball at this point. But this was one of those small scourges that was sort of worth a active politician going out and getting their photo ops, Chuck Schumer style in our modern terms. He's going to be there every Sunday with something. But this wasn't like the Wood. This was not driving the conversation at any point that I could see, at least in hindsight, and reading up on others who have delved more deeply into the contemporaneous records.
And then what's so fascinating about it is then you have all of these regulations that are being put into place. And so you have a New York where so many things are outlawed. There's so much vice regulation. But by the 1950s and 1960s, New York is kind of Sin City, so you have these pinball machines, and now they're in brothels and in porn stores, and a place like Times Square, which is just rife with black and gray market commerce, is going to be a place where you have to go to be able to play pinball. And as you were saying earlier, right, it drives all of this underground, and so once you make pinball illegal, only thieves and criminals will play pinball.
It's so much fun, though.
Right? Well, it becomes extra fun when you have to go to the porn store in order to play pinball.
And we'll get to Harry's top 5 pinball moments of glory in a second. We'll do that. But it's funny. You rattled off a number of New York City mayors who have had their sort of moments of cracking down. You didn't mention Bloomberg, who I think I learned about this pinball crusade first during the Bloomberg era, because Bloomberg was doing things like the soda ban and cracking down on these ways. And there was a lot of more libertarian-leaning sort of anti-nanny state stuff. And I think that percolated back some of these stories of like Bloomberg going after sodas is like La Guardia going after pinball machines or whatever. And so, Harry,
Giuliani too.
Right, yeah. Well,
Can't
yeah,
forget
Giuliani.
Giuliani.
I think, yeah, I mean, some of that was a lot graver than soda. But yes, but this larger question of, especially in New York City, of the nanny state. How much of a through line is that for a New York City mayor over the decades?
New York is such a big and complicated place, and it's a city that has a large group of dependent citizens at any given time. People who need different forms of government support, 1 million or so kids in the public schools, probably 1.5 million kids altogether. And so every mayor wants to do some of that paterfamilias stuff. By the way, funny Giuliani thing, just before he ends up having his piss Christ fight with the Brooklyn Museum, speaking of moral
There's
symbolism,
another one for us.
absurdity, which is a real winner because he's divorcing his wife, he wants to run for the Senate, all this is happening. This exhibit is actually complicated, but like involves corrupt foreign money and other things, but he just wants to make this a free culture war and a way to appeal to white Catholics upstate, right? But guess what becomes legal in New York at the same time? I don't believe Giuliani signs the law, but he allows it to happen, is tattoo parlors, which had been illegal for nearly 40 years, I think since 1961, when there was a small hepatitis B outbreak. And so to protect the city at large and the children, I'm sure, the tattoo parlors were illegal in New York for the next 36 years. And then they come back, happily enough, during the Rudy years, amid the Disneyfication of Times Square and all that stuff. My favorite Giuliani thing, the best thing he did, was his weird pseudo-porn shop ban, which I loved. I've written about this because it created the 60-40 rule, where 60% of your store had to not be videos and sex toys and so on. And this meant that all these porn stores had unbelievably good movies and books and CDs and whatnot for sale and at really cheap prices, because that stuff was just the lost leader they were sort of stuck with. So on one of my first dates with my wife now, who wasn't from New York, I was like, I got to take you to this great place. And I take her to this beloved porn store on Christopher Street. And I'm like, look at this unbelievable selection of like awesome old foreign movies. Here's 5 corners with like Tom Robbins and Jodie Foster. And she's looking around the place. I'm like, no, trust me. This is a great deal.
Harry, can I blow your mind right now? My first ever job was as a clerk at Kim's Video, which was the ratio was probably the other way around. It was probably 60% art films and 40% porn, but it was like remarkable to just sit behind the counter and be like, and just those be the two options. Like, I'm either going to rent you a Bergman film, or I'm going to rent you the big one that summer was a film called Brooklyn Meat, which was a gay porn that we would take bets behind the counter. This was in the VHS days. We would take bets for how long it would go on the shelf before someone would rent it again. And it was almost always under 10 minutes. Like, we'd put I don't know how word got around, but like someone would return Brooklyn Meat, we'd put it on the shelf, and then everyone would place their bets. 3 minutes, 2 minutes, the next customer, and almost always under 10.
Why do I feel like this episode is spinning off so many different episodes?
I know.
Yep. It's a 10-episode episode.
So maybe pinball really is a slippery slope.
Exactly. Yes. Perfect. All right. So, Harry, when I reached out to you about this episode, I said I think there's these interesting things about mayorality and moral panics and vice and all this stuff, and you were like, I actually think it's a pinball story. And so, tell me, what is interesting to you about pinball itself, and particularly, kind of, does it connect to now?
So, man, all I got to say here is 1976, there are these hearings to get pinball back. There's a number of council members who are really dubious about this. And same stuff La Guardia was saying, almost word for word. The mobsters and racketeers are going to use these machines to launder the prostitution and drug and gambling money. And then finally, what turns this around is this dude, Roger Sharp, who's one of the founders of America's Pinball Association, PAPA, which is a fascinating thing, and a great player himself, as are his children, wrote literally the book on pinball. But he goes in front of the council. He goes, no, this is a game of skill. Look, I can take this shot and I can hit the center ramp right now. And the council members, I'd say they're no dummies, but they're council members. But in any case, one of them says, oh, yeah, well, can you do it on this other machine that's not the one you've said is your machine? And he goes and he hits the shot, and that shot is what liberates pinball. By the way, speaking of whether or not this is just La Guardia's a pioneer here, but all these other cities follow suit. So L.A. bans it, Chicago bans it, San Francisco represent, old, different San Francisco, not today's, but represent. They're one of the few big cities that keeps it. And then after that hearing, New York gets it back. It's not clear initially if Abe Beam's going to sign the bill or veto it or what, but he comes around. He's another very short mayor like La Guardia. Well, La Guardia is short with this.
Bloomberg.
Yes, overflowing personality. Beam is a very dull mayor. And finally he says, I can't really see the harm, and he signs the bill. But by that point, pinball had become a real game of skill, which killed the pinball manufacturers over time. This goes to a lot of very modern internet era stuff, right? Like, you're building something, you need people to play it for so long and then to lose and play it again, or the game doesn't work. But you have these dedicated players who are having like 8-minute balls and are really bumping the machines but not quite tilting them, right? And in the course of doing this, these machines need more repair. Like, these people are a key part of your market, but they're screwing it up for everything else. Video games are looming at this point. They're not a reality yet, but smart people see what's coming. And these don't have thousands of mechanical pieces. They're not difficult to assemble and maintain. And what starts happening is all these guys, including Sharp, the guy who wrote the book on pinball and saved it in New York, and the Williams family and the Bally family in Chicago, like these manufacturing families, they all end up in the gaming industry, which is just the gambling industry, minus BS or BL.
Right.
Because they know how to make beautiful distractions that sort of end up with the same results over time. But you have lights and sounds and this feeling that connects you to the machine. And once you can do that, you can do slots, you can get those obsessed people in a much, much more profitable fashion. And they pretty much all end up there as pinball more or less dies out. There's a few sort of hobbyists, obsessives, and high-end people left. The Williams Company made an attempt to create Pinball 3000, which had a Medieval Madness, also a Mars Attacks game, which was awesome. Not as good as the earlier one, though, where the pins, the balls, and the physical gameplay connected to a screen. But, like, finally, this was sort of the cool and unprofitable thing, and especially in a place like New York. In New York, space is so precious. There aren't skating rinks. There's no bowling alleys left. Diners suck because the price of land is too much for it to make any sense. And a $15, a diner omelet, like, that whole thing is an abomination.
And I think you could see that legacy. By the way, that was an incredible history of pinball right there. But bravo. But, you can also see that legacy obviously going to today. And we have just this, like, stunning rise of sports gambling that I'm sort of surprised that we haven't seen any of this language around it. People are just kind of rolling over. I mean, I don't not necessarily think that's necessarily a bad thing, but like states are just rolling over and saying that, oh, this wave is coming. We're going to make it legal. It's like get on board or not. And you don't hear any of this language that you heard. But as you're pointing out, it's really the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Right. And states are getting revenue from that gambling as opposed to the pinballs, which they couldn't skim a little off the top.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that brings us to the end of the episode. We covered a lot here.
I know we did.
And, you know, like every good guest, as you were talking about this issue, you dropped like 5 or 6 other possible topics along the way. So this is wonderful, Harry. But Harry Siegel, thank you so much for doing this. There's the Daily Beast, there's the Daily News column, and then we've had your co-host on FAQ NYC, Christina Greer, on. So now we've completed the cycle. We've checked both those boxes. Anything else you're up to? I mean, that's enough.
Oh, God. Just reading Italo Calvino's T0 and the story How Much Shall I Bet, which is the text about gambling. I strongly recommend. It's about 6 pages, and you can actually pull the whole thing online. So that'll be my shout-out here.
Great, and we'll link to that in the show notes. But Harry, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you all for having me.
Yeah, and Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
This Day in Esoteric Political History is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX, a network of independent, listener-supported, artist-owned podcasts. If you'd like to support the show and the network directly, we can't do this show without you. You can do so at our website, thisdaypod.org. Our researcher and producer is Jacob Feldman. Our producer is Brittany Brown. Kala Nakua helps with transcripts. Special thanks to Julie Shapiro and Audrey Murdovich, executive producers at Radiotopia, and special thanks to the whole team at Radiotopia and PRX. Get in touch if you have any questions or comments or ideas for topics on the show or special guests that you would like us to have on. You can email us thisdaypod@gmail.com, or you can find a form at thisdaypod.com. On our website, you can also get full archives, transcripts, and learn lots more about the show. My name is Jody Avirgan. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon. Support for This Day in Esoteric Political History comes from Odoo. If you feel like you're wasting time and money with your current business software, or just want to know what you could be missing, then you'll need to join the millions of others who have switched to Odoo. Odoo is the affordable, all-in-one management software with a library of fully integrated business applications that help you get more done in less time for a fraction of the price. To learn more, visit odoo.com/thisday. That's odoo.com/thisday. Odoo, modern management made simple.
Radiotopia.